Our final presenter for this session is Dr. Stephanie MacMahon. Steph is a lecturer in the School of Education here at the University of Queensland, and of course is our program director in the Learning Lab. Steph draws on over 20 years of experience in teaching across P to 12 and higher education. Her research focuses on how we learn with and from others, investigating the relationships between human connection and learning, as well as exploring knowledge mobilization from research into practice. So please join me in welcoming Steph MacMahon.
Thank you. Thank you, Chase. And thank you, Donna, for that question to Sasha, because I think that's a really nice segue into what I'm going to talk about today, which is about our Partner Schools program. And I'm talking about the Partner Schools program today because it is a research project. And those of you who are involved in our program will know that because I pester you with pre and post measures and interviews at the end. So I do want to talk a little bit about that because we are wanting to extend the Partner Schools program into this social and emotional learning space, and perhaps focusing on teachers might be a really nice place to start. So I thought that was a great question. Thank you, Donna. So you're hearing today about the power of the science of learning to help us to understand learning. But you can also hear, and this is really what our Learning Lab is all about, is this challenge around the how. How do we take research and put it into practice? This implementation or this mobilization of research is what is the really difficult thing in this process. And as I mentioned this morning, we've been investigating some of these barriers and therefore designing our approach and our process to try and address some of these barriers. And this morning I mentioned context and access, but now I want to focus in on teacher self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the belief that an individual has in their capacity to be able to complete their tasks well, or to make a positive difference in the lives of the people that they are working with. And when we're talking about self-efficacy of teachers, it's been found that teacher self-efficacy contributes to, I better mind that tape, hadn't I, Alex? Contributes to teacher effectiveness, to student outcomes, to teacher well-being, and to the way in which they're engaging in their instructional practice. So it comes back to that beliefs that Sasha was talking about before as well. Research looking into teacher self-efficacy as a potential barrier to engaging with evidence-informed practice has shown that generally teachers report low self-efficacy in this process. They report finding it difficult to engage with research and put it into practice. And the reason that this is a challenge that we need to address is because low self-efficacy then negatively impacts on behaviour and on effort. So it's important for us to really think about why is this such an integral barrier for us to address when we're talking about translation of research or mobilisation of research into practice. And the reason it's important is because our educators and our school leaders do the heavy lifting. They're the ones who are taking the research and taking it on the ground and doing the work in their classrooms and with their teams. So unless we focus on building this sense of self-efficacy, their beliefs, their knowledge and their skills to be able to engage with this, then we're going to miss the mark completely. In addition to that, we should also be thinking about the power of collective efficacy. And in education, this is defined as a staff's shared belief that through their collective action, they can positively influence student outcomes, including those who are disengaged and disadvantaged. And those of you working in schools, those of you working in organisations will know how powerful a shared sense of belief in making a positive difference to your organisation really is. So I'm going to share with you just the beginning of this story today and share some initial findings that we have collected from our 2021 data of some objective measures of teacher self and collective efficacy. When I was designing the Partner Schools program, I was looking at all of these barriers that we are facing in getting research to move into practice. Context, access, time, evidence, and teacher self-efficacy. They were the main things I was targeting when I was trying to design this program. I knew that we needed to address teacher self and collective efficacy. And the way that we decided we could best do that is by building into the program a gradual development of teacher knowledge and skills in the science of learning, but also their knowledge and skills in research, in understanding how to engage with research, to critically evaluate research, and to do that, to put it into practice in their own contexts. And we need to be able to do that because it's our educators and school leaders who are sustaining and scaling this work in their contexts after we leave them. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our Partner Schools program, it's a year-long program that commences at the beginning of the school year. And we start with a couple of really intensive days of professional learning, where we focus in on their identified problem of practice or their phenomenon, whether it's curiosity, whether it's learning strategies, whether it's well-being, whether it's a sense of belonging. And we look at the literature around that and we unpack it and we work with them to design their own research project that they can then conduct in their school to gather data and evidence about that phenomenon in their context. We then work with them over the course of the year to design their project, to implement their project, to collect their data, to analyse their data, to interpret that data, and then to give them a platform or a showcase, such as today, where they share this back with the broader community, but more importantly, where they can action this in their own schools. As I mentioned this morning, our program is built on this model of Levens. So today you will hear from our first group of schools who'll be talking about their exploratory projects, where they're producing new knowledge in their context. In our second part of the Partner Schools session, you'll hear from schools talking about how they're using knowledge to implement the science of learning into their context. And then in the third section, we're going to address the really challenging part, which is how do you mediate this? How do you make this sustain and scale across your whole school? And a couple of our schools will share their insights into that. So to understand this process of self-efficacy, we introduced some self and collective measures, efficacy measures at the beginning of last year, and then some post measures at the end of last year. And given everything that's gone on in our world in the past however many years, we only were able to collect a very small sample of pre and post measures. We collected a lot of interviews, but only 14 teachers completed the pre and post. So I'll be chasing you all up and making sure I get them from you this year. So here's some preliminary findings from that very small data set, and I'm going to illustrate them with some of the qualitative data that we've collected as well. So we have found significant improvements in teacher self-efficacy in relation to their beliefs that they can support students to do well at school. That's a pretty fundamental belief for teachers. But to see that potentially our project is having a positive impact on that is really, really inspiring. And I think that this particular quote captures that really well. And this participant said, "I learned so much about pedagogy. We spend so much time thinking about the content itself and not so much about how our students best learn that particular content. It opened my eyes up to other ideas about how students best learn." We found a significant improvement in teacher beliefs about being able to find and access relevant research. And this came out in both the self and the collective efficacy findings. And you heard me talk before about that access is a barrier to research getting into practice. So this is a really powerful finding again. This participant said, "I'm working in school improvement, but I felt like the partner schools gave me structure and access to research. I knew that you'd be able to point us in the right direction. Having an external partnership would keep us true to our project, and I really liked that." We found huge improvements in teacher beliefs of effectively communicating about evidence to their leadership team. Shout out to Goulburn Valley Grammar School and to James and his team. That's their toolkit that James will be talking about today. And it's been really exciting to see our schools develop visual representations, toolkits, pedagogical frameworks based on the work that they're doing with us and also independently of us, and be able to stand in front of their school and communicate this with clarity, with confidence, and with a really strong evidence base to their community. And a number of people have made this comment sort of informally as well as formally. We were able to have integrity in front of our colleagues because we have done the presentations with you and we had the research. So being able to stand up and talk about this in front of other people and share this gives them greater integrity back at their school with their leadership team. We found significant improvements in teacher beliefs about being able to more effectively communicate about evidence with academic researchers. And I think this is probably one of the most exciting changes that we see in our teachers, who in the first instance often say to us things like this. You think about researchers, and this is what the person said when they were explaining it, and you think about them as being over there, as disconnected. But the partnership schools is allowing you to see that they are people, and there's connection and relevance and accessibility to these people. And for me, this is an exciting piece of, an exciting finding, because it's telling me that for researchers, we need to be sitting at the table with our educators, because they have something really important that they now believe they can share with us. And I think that's really exciting. And finally, that they can more skillfully discuss evidence with one another. And again, this is a really exciting finding, particularly because our teachers are talking about how these conversations about teaching and learning are shifting from just being in those professional learning practice sessions to happening in more informal environments during the day. So the story continues. I'm on about this story thing today. And it's starting to provoke for me, as all research does, some new questions about teaching and learning and about efficacy. And even as we were out at a mine site interviewing some miners, and I couldn't help but think about the power of self and collective efficacy in those environments as well. So I'm wondering, what role does self and collective efficacy play in rewriting the narrative around learning in other industries? And how can formal and informal conversations about learning promote efficacy in our organisations and in our schools? So just finally, I'd like to thank all of our schools who've been part of our Partner Schools program this year, and to my fantastic team who is growing and expanding every year, which is also really exciting. And that's all from me, and you're nearly ready for morning tea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steph. Do we have any questions for Steph before we go to morning tea? No, I think everyone seems pretty keen for morning tea. Well, thank you very much for joining us for this morning's session. I hope you found these talks really interesting. I know I certainly did. And so morning tea will just be out here in the Global Change Institute atrium. We'll reconvene a couple of minutes before at 11 o'clock to observe a minute of silence for Remembrance Day. So just keep an ear out for the very loud cowbell provided by Steph. That'll just be your notice to come back to reconvene for the next session. But please join me in thanking again all the speakers from this morning's session.